All right, so let's get started. Today, I'm going to be kind of presenting something a little bit different, as you could see from a lot of the other screens. Today, I'm going to be kind of more talking about poetry as the mathematics of meaning. Mostly, there is the merging of poetry and science, and so yeah, let's get started. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm kind of a strange one, I guess you could say, when it comes to the world of poetry and writing. I'm an author, and you can see a science fiction, The Second Sky. I'm also a physicist. I work for the aerospace industry, and I work on solar cells for space. So that's pretty cool. So the James Webb Telescope or the rover on Mars. The company I work for, we make sure those are nice and powered and giving us all that cool photographs and information and stuff like that. So if your other question might be, when do I have time to write? And the answer is, good question. I don't sleep. so um, here on Medium, I've been kind of a writer on Medium since 2021. I write mainly for a journal called Scribe, which was created and edited by Thomas Godot. Maybe he's here or not. If so, hello. I'm also the editor at a science peer-reviewed science poetry journal called Consilience Journal. So if you guys ever write science poetry, please submit. Be awesome. And my writing, it merges science and humanities. It aims to explore the many worlds both within and without, and that's through science fiction, that's through poetry, that's through everything. And I look to kind of unveil a deeper reality, kind of just like science does, but I think poetry can be a tool here, and that's what I'm going to kind of talk about. So to kind of get a little bit of flavor, these are some pieces of my poetry that have been published in Scribe, and so I can read a few here. And this kind of showcases where I'm talking about when I'm saying I'm merging both science and poetry, both the mathematics and science and humanities, right? So here's a quote from this is my newest poem, Orbits of a Forlorn Physicist. It went wrong, calculating pages of nothing, imaginary probabilities, traded fate for belief, derived unreal equations, and called it our sunset. And now here I am, the luster gone of my hope, equations without fire, fire without hearth, searcher lost in the ruins of collapsed star. And then, in the silence of languid stars, radio waves moan their billion-year-old hearts. I listen, afraid of those clocks that bind, lost in the moonlight of cold, ruffled sheets, reaching for a single kiss across pulsar fields upon the cleft branches, those fallen trees bereft, hope as luminescent phosphoric dreams buried in the earth's darkest caves. And so the idea here is playing on these scientific concepts, but using the metaphors, similes for, you know, the human condition, right? So for seeking our meaning or dealing with lost love or tragedy or, death and all these other concepts and ideas and experiences we have as human beings, but yet connecting and making that bridge to both, science and humanities, from the cosmos within and the cosmos without, right? So, in every poem, an affinity for true redemption and a final release from the shackles of time. The veil between the atoms of my fingers and the atoms of your skin are galaxies across. Yet here we are dreaming of our lips crossing the void as one. So, kind of gives you a little bit of an idea on kind of where I come from when it comes to writing poetry and as a scientist too. Because for me, I see little difference between poetry and mathematics or poetry and physics. I just see a little difference between just kind of like the difference between the flight of a bird or a sunflower swaying. For me, I see both as poetic alongside the physics of turbulence and the physics and mathematics to describe those things happening. To me, it's the same one and the same thing. It's just using different types of concepts and different types of tools to describe the same image, whether it be a sestina or the fractal geometry of a sponge. It kind of, for me, poetry is analogous to mathematical proofs of meaning and the human condition. So as math is using rules and laws to prove something, a statement true or false, to me, poetry also does the same thing, but obviously it's not using the same rules as mathematics. Because for me, the universe is essentially poetic, it's beguiling wonders. And so you can see here's really nice images of the James Webb telescope that have recently come out. To me, looking at the universe, studying the universe is poetry. It's just maybe science instead uses telescopes, they use mathematics, they use equipment to measure things, whereas the poet uses metaphor. We use form, we use cadences, and etc., and meter to kind of describe all of that. And so really all you really have to do is look up or within, right? And so we kind of have, as I was talking about, the separation of the poetic proof and the mathematical proof. Obviously, mathematics uses rules of logic, whether it be deductive logic, i.e., P implies Q, you have P, therefore Q, right? Or inductive logic, where one thing is true, and then you go out and measure the other thing is true, and the other thing is true, and the other thing is true. So therefore, probably all Ks are true, even though it would take an infinite amount of time to measure everything, and so mathematics itself has a set of axioms, right, that define rules to prove a statement is true or false. Whereas poetic proof is you kind of start with, if is my love like a rose, right? Well, you started there with a conditional statement. And as you go on in verses, using different structures or form, or using meters or metaphor or analogy, right, you're kind of proving whether that is true or not. So here's Shakespeare, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Shakespeare, but we all know Shakespeare. Shall I compare these to a summer's day, which begins with a conditional statement. And the rest of the verses will be proving that statement, right? Your premises. How is that statement true? And it's obviously a sonnet using iambic pentameter and using deductive logic as you go down to prove even the first statement, So in a way, whether we know it or not, or whether we care or not, mathematics is a part of poetry, right? And luckily, it doesn't use the same rules, and poetry is not mathematics. Otherwise, we'd have like 5 poets in the world, because nobody's the biggest fan of mathematics. But mathematics for me, and kind of my point of this talk, is to show that it is beautiful. It's just a different tool set to study that beauty, to study that infinite concepts and what it is to be alive, because so many things dance endlessly in the human condition, especially that which also sits as mathematical sense of infinity. As Dickinson wrote, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. They're dealing with the complexity of death and also the complexity of infinities, right? And so the human condition and poetry aims just as science to understand the universe, consciousness, meaning, purpose, creativity, love, time, nature, the future, memory, loss, death, eternity, all these things. It's just poetry uses a different tool, but we're all kind of going for this. We're all trying to understand the same things, right? And so for me, the universe or multiverse, wherever we live in, has no absolute meaning. It is also void, or it is also void of absolute reference, frame of morality, time, boundary, etc. And what I mean by that is that the universe was made without like this meaning somewhere inherent in a galaxy saying this is the meaning of life. Well, no, that's actually not true. That meaning is more something that is relative. It's created, something that you find, right? And there's different tools to find that meaning. Now, one can argue that, well, science, the goal is not to find meaning. It's to find facts. It's to find a theory to explain, certain phenomena and stuff like that. And that is true. But then you could kind of add in, well, with philosophy and also poetry, there's your tool to take those scientific concepts that we're finding and apply that meaning, and especially to understand kind of the dynamics of reality, so science, poetry is not a new concept. A good example is Lucretius, right? In the Greeks, in The Nature of Things, he mixes both poetry with Roman Greek natural philosophy of Democritus and Epicureanism, which looks at more of an atomistic and materialistic view of the universe, meaning instead of all these platonic solids and stuff like that, and maybe that things are made of love and heart, whatever. Lucretius kind of believed that yes, things were made of atoms. Now, for the for the Greeks, atoms were something that were not, you know, they were the fundamental things of the universe, and there was something that you cannot split, or there's nothing more to the atom. We know now because of particle physics that atoms are made of electrons, they're made of a nucleus of protons and neutrons, and even those things, the nucleus can be split and made of quarks and quantum fields, and maybe we'll find that those are even made of strings or loops in space time and so forth, right? So the Greeks were quite smart and they helped create Western philosophy. However, as science grew, our knowledge grew from that. But Lucretius, regardless, used poetry to explain that, right? As a kind of science communication. And some of the stuff was actually pretty good, right? And explaining kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about the atomistic view of the universe. So all things keep on everlasting motion, which is very interesting. It's a very quantum mechanical actually idea there, which obviously in that time he didn't realize, but things are all in motion. There's no where we cannot achieve 0 Kelvin, that with entropy and heat and stuff like that. Atoms and particles are always wiggling around, right? Out of the infinite ocean, out of the infinite comes the particles. Again, very quantum mechanical, right? Because we look in fields, and from fields you pop out these particles, right? But particles are just energy and matter in these infinite fields, which is really kind of a fascinating thing. Speeding above, below, an endless dance. Nothing can dwindle to nothing, which is also a very interesting idea, very another quantum mechanical idea, because though maybe we were taught that there is a nothingness. In terms of quantum mechanics, there is no nothingness. There are fields that even when we think there's nothing, I like to refer to it more as unformed everythingness, right? And so as you interact with those fields, things can form from it, whether that be atoms, whether it be molecules, whether it be a chair, whether it be a cat, whether it be you and me, right? As given time, that can go back into the nothingness, which is not nothingness, is again a field of unformed potentiality, right? But anyways, the atoms in it must be used over and over again. And then his last one, again, the concept of time, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, because time is one of those fascinating things that both the physicist, the mathematician, the poet have tried to describe, yet it's still one of those things that kind of slip our grasp. Time is a very interesting thing, but for Lucretius, time by itself does not exist. Very interesting on relativity, but from things themselves, there results a sense of what has already taken place, what is now going on, and what is to ensue. It must be claimed that anyone can sense time by itself apart from the movement of things. Thousands of years ago, even before Einstein in 1905, he was already kind of tingling, playing with, getting closer to the ideas of relativity that came later. So looking at poetry as maths, poems again begin with a conditional statement. If love is then with you, I have found it. P implies Q. I cannot wait have you within Q or P. Your eyes and stars make me whole. Q and P, right? Q or P, Q and P, right? These are different statements of logic that we're using in poetry. Poetry can also have the structure of the poem itself, right? So you can do little diagonals, you can do all kinds of stuff with poetry. And one very interesting one is the fib, which is the Fibonacci sequence of numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, blah, blah, blah. And here you can kind of see in the middle by Athena Kierkegaard, kiss me again, tongue and lips, like Fibonacci sequence, each move in a spiral, unfold, a working through and against again. That structure is actually, the way she wrote it, is a Fibonacci sequence. And so utilizing rhythm, quality, cadence, sentence structure, line breaks, syllables, logical flow, or metaphor, all those are mathematical in nature. And so this is actually one of my poems, one of my newest ones. It's written as a sestina. And so here I kind of break it down to you, the form of the sestina. So you have A, B, C, D, E, F. Those are your those N words, right? Sunset, stars, hope, nothingness, me, heart. And they repeat in different forms. So instead of the second verse being F, A, E, B, D, C, and then C, F, etc., and you can see kind of on the right side how the structure is in a way. A sestina is almost mathematical in nature in the way it kind of um, circles within itself, which is very interesting. And so you have form, and obviously stanza 7 you have a tercet, all right? And the meter here I kind of chose with iambic pentameter, da da dum, da dum, da dum, da dum, da dum, right? That's kind of how we talk. Shakespeare used it a lot. And then the metaphor, the loneliness from a failed marriage, like darkness of the universe, right? So they kind of combine to make one. And so, as we talked about, poetry echoes mathematics. Every poem is a proof, not of logic and rules and purpose like mathematics, but a proof in kind of meaning and kind of the human condition, right? Uh, and so for mathematics, we talk about beauty and stuff of proofs, which requires the least number of steps to create a fundamental truth. The poem can be mathematical in that way too, is that to describe something fundamental, describe something inevitable, we want the best form, the best way of describing that people can take away. So if a heart is a butterfly, then let it never miss the flower of truth, nor catch the winds of harmony upon its wings as it calls to you like a blade of grass upon a thunderstorm of madness. So poems can also just describe mathematical or physical things instead of being itself mathematical or physical. And so, as we talked about earlier, time as being one of those concepts where we are trying to kind of understand its very complicated existence. And so, up in the top corner, don't get scared, it's a few equations, but here we have time dilation, which the one on the left is time dilation because an object moving at this closer to the speed of light, which is that c, right? And so this is special relativity, and then on the right it's more general relativity, where time is also dilated by a large massive object or a gravitational field like a black hole, right? And so time, we thought, is one of these things that was universal. There was a giant universal clock where everything ticked to, right? That was Newtonian's view in the late 1700s. And then we come to Einstein and physics changing that in the 1900s, where time is no longer seen as this absolute thing. There's not one clock, but there's an infinite amount of clocks. Each of us has a clock. Each entity has a clock, depending on how fast it's moving, depending on how near and close it is to a large gravitational field. And so time itself becomes this fabric, this dynamic thing that changes based on interaction. Yet, at the same time, in thermodynamics, time is also seen, thanks to Boltzmann, as an arrow, right? And so, which implies that time of the past and time of the future and time of the present, it's all different. They're separated. Obviously, we experience past, present, future in a different way. But why is that? Well, Boltzmann came out and other physicists said, is entropy. Entropy is always increasing. As entropy increases, that creates a boundary between the past, the present, and the future. In the future is higher entropy, and the past is lower entropy. That's why we don't experience the past before the future, but the future after the past. And so I just wrote a little poem to kind of, but at the same time, time is one of those things that kind of is beguiling. It flees away from us. And so, as Rilke said, the eternal current draws all ages along with it through both realms, overhauling them in both. Or time is a thermal agitation, utilizing obviously that thermodynamics part of time. The heat I feel with you in my arms in bed, we say disorder within the sheets, irreversible choices we imbued upon the quiet regrets of a shaking hand. And as we forget the day that so came our judge, hurt, and executioner, that ticking clock, as became the message from your husband, like that, and together wait. And so you can have the human aspect in time, yet still playing on the physics of what's going on in there. All right, to kind of summarize, poetry through meaning can give us hope. It can help us make sense of life and therefore true existential freedom. It longs to describe the ineffable, describe the emotions and constants of human nature. Mathematics, on the other hand, is the language of nature. The rules of logic and reason is a tool for describing that ineffable, indescribable, the concepts and image of the imagination. And poetry, therefore, kind of mixing both of those we talked about, can be used in a mathematical way, like Fibonacci sequence or spirals, fractals, stuff like that, or its structure on the page or logical arguments. Poetry can also be the bridge of communication from the abstract or scientific to the humanities. So, as a tool for science communication to kind of dive into those deeper meanings, help to connect humanity with the infinite or the universe, and build a more kind of complete worldview between the humanities and the sciences. And Scribe, who I write for, Medium, is kind of a place to experiment with these ideas, right? And so, as we kind of venture into the unknown future, a view of reality is needed, a more poetic view of the cosmos. And that's kind of why I write, utilizing both science and the humanities. So, thank you for listening. And are there any questions or oh wow, there's a lot of questions here. But and yes, I can give you a copy of the slides. I think they're recording these, but I will one thing will do is try to put this on my Medium actually page, or if Medium has the copy of the slides, I will love to kind of say that. So to show that. Hey Thomas, I don't know what time it is in France right now. I think it might be like what, midnight? I'll have to check. But thanks for joining. 1 a.m. Wow. So, but happy to represent Scribe, Thomas. Hopefully people had fun and found this quite fascinating. So, but yeah, if you have any questions, follow me on Medium. You can also read my book. And then I actually, so here, maybe I'll actually have a page in here that kind of shows you can also read. There's a book called The Embrace of Dawn, which thanks to Thomas, he put together for a lot of the writers collective from Scribe. So you can, because I think Scribe has some of the best poets on Medium, so you can check that out. And you can check out my first a novel called The Second Sky, which is more sci-fi or literary sci-fi. So, and then yeah, in the slides there's just additional resources if you're willing to kind of read more about how poetry and mathematics connect. So. Oh, what spurred me to begin with mathematics in your poetry? Well, oh, here, I will link. Here, I'm going to put some links in the chat real quick. So, what spurred me is I have always been kind of interested in science, right? And so, since I was a little kid. And so, and then I also loved poetry. Sorry, I'm trying to. There you go. That's my book. You can also, I gave a TED talk, if you like TED talks, about the importance of science and storytelling for science communication. And I'll try to get that here too. I'm just having trouble copying shit. But yeah. Yeah, so sorry. I'll get back to your question. Science and poetry. So I've always been a scientist, and I felt that, I actually started writing science fiction first, and then eventually started writing poetry like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and it just came naturally, honestly. And then I just kept trying to merge both of them in the best way I could. For me, it wasn't just about, oh, I want to write a poem about some scientific concept, which, some people do, that's fine. But to me, it's bridging the gap between, I'm going to write a poem maybe about my divorce or about the loss of a loved one, yet use metaphors and similes that are scientific to explain what's going on. And so that's kind of where that started, and been kind of doing it ever since, right? Leah, let's see. This TED Talk should be called "The Science of Tomorrow." Here, I am. There you go. So I think that was the one you had. Yep, that was it. Awesome. Yeah, actually, I think I don't know. Poetry allows me to see things sometimes that other people don't, to make those connections, and I think I use I write poetry all the time, and I use it all the time, and even for the aerospace industry, you have to use that creativity. You have to be able to connect those dots that other people haven't to solve problems. And so I do that all. Yeah. So I think that's why, poetry, and also do photography, and I'm a avid birder and everything. And so all those things I connect the dots with. And so I think bridging those gaps and not kind of like pigeonholing yourself in one concept or one kind of field is very important to kind of see things in a more universal way. But yeah, is there any more questions? And if you don't, go follow Scribe. Trust me, you will you will get some of the best poets. So, and Thomas is truly amazing, and he's amazing at collecting poets too, who will just change the way you see reality and yourselves. Yeah. So I'm glad to write there. And then I have a poetry book coming out later this year in November. It's actually with a group of people, and it will be kind of like I've showed here. All the folks who are in that book are also either scientists or love science. So it's a lot of science poetry. It's called Entangled. So happy to share that. And yeah. Oh, thank you. Yep. Are there any more questions? If not, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook. Um, go buy my book. Come to my book events. But if you're in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area. Oh, okay, Mary. I will find your question. Actually, let's see. Could you ask it again? I want to make sure I answer it. Oh, there we go. I have like 4 screens open, so I lost where my mouse was. Sorry, I'm trying to find your question. Yeah, and I think another thing is reading Jesse Scott, that your daughter loves science and creativity. I think another thing to really help with science communication um, is poetry, because poetry is an easier. I don't know if you want to say easier, but a kind of creative way to showcase those really difficult concepts. Because as I talked about in my presentation, poetry and science are kind of trying to do the same thing with trying to understand these inevitable concepts, and in a humanistic type way. And I think to me, poetry is kind of a that tool for science communication is important. And I think people also need to know that scientists like myself and many others can also be creative, right? And creative folks like you guys out there can also love science and be into science, right? I always hated kind of the thing in school where it's like, people were shied away from science or afraid of science and mathematics when really a lot of that was just, sometimes bad teachers, right? Oh, this isn't for the creative. This is, you have to have a certain brain set to do this. And I always never liked that. I think everybody should kind of take part in that and love that and kind of bridge that gap. So yeah. Oh, Q&A. Okay. Sorry, I was at the wrong place. I have not actually written a poem based on the Fibonacci formula. But if you do it kind of like I had in my slide, it would be you'd have one word as the first line, one word as the second line, and then two words, th- three words, 5 words, 8 words, 13 words, 21 words, etc. Right? After a while, it becomes kind of difficult to fit 144 words. So you might not be able to do the full Fibonacci sequence, but you can kind of structure it that way. Okay. Yep. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, etc. Thank you. I'm glad everyone liked the presentation. So, well, I hope you all enjoy Medium Day and the rest of the presentations to come. I think it ends at 7 p.m. Well, I don't know. 7 p.m. Eastern time or no, 9 p.m. Eastern time. I don't know. But all right, I'm about to head out, but thanks everybody.